Hi everyone, my name is Sophia, and today I'm going to be giving you all some insight about these two authors I read about. These authors are Dr. John Mearsheimer and research fellow Hal Brands. I'm going to start out by explaining a central topic that both authors are concerned about, which is the Cold War. And though they don't go over to narrate every single specific event of the Cold War, there are some concrete themes that are frequently touched upon in both of their works. So first, it's important to understand that during this time, there was a very divided global order. You had big powers like the United States, and you had its competing power, Russia. And this created what we called a bipolar world, which is two competing states that are the primary great powers. At this time, China was not really involved because they were actually suffering from what was called the era of humiliation for them because of British and Western colonialization and globalization that they were not able to keep up with at that time. And because of this dichotomy between the United States and Russia, there was a lot of prevailing views about what the United States should actually do. And a lot of foreign experts actually disagree about what should have happened during the Cold War, but in this case, Mearsheimer and Brands both come to a consensus that the initial actions of the United States with Russia and with China were good up until a certain point, and that's when they start to dissect. We can look at the map and see that the United States is a part of NATO, a global alliance based around the military and defense efforts and mutual funding from each other. And Russia is not. They are part of a socialist country at this time, and they are actually competing against the United States in many aspects, which is what we call the Cold War. And because of this, the United States has its own clear interest, which is in democracy, and in fact, they want to spread this democracy and these free values throughout the world, which is what we like to call liberalism. And through alliances like NATO, which is based in the military, as I said, we can assume this is liberal hegemony, which is going to create a huge central theme for both of the authors and how they talk about US foreign policy. Let's look right now at Dr. John Mearsheimer. He is very renowned in the field, and he has his own school of thought called offensive realism. This offensive realism essentially means that we can group states as actors and under 5 main themes. His first assumption is that states are actors that will act under an anarchist system. And what this means is not what you think it is. Anarchy in this context does not mean some huge overthrowing the government agenda. It actually means that because there is no huge world government, there is no one that the states as nations can turn to in order for some higher form of governance. His second assumption is that all states have some capability of military offense, meaning that if push comes to shove, they do have troops, they do have tech, they do have something that'll give them that show of force. And third is that one state can never be certain of another state's intentions. And though states might not often lie to each other, this does not mean they can be 100% true either. And fourth, the principal goal of a state is to survive, which is key to the next assumption, which is that states will inevitably be strategic, rational, and smart in such an anarchist system. And because of this, we can assume that great powers like US, like China, like Russia, will automatically act in their best interest without making some sort of silly mistake or trying to sabotage themselves, which is a prerequisite to Mearsheimer's claims as well as Brands. And so now that we've covered these big 5 assertions, we now know that Mearsheimer believes that states will almost inevitably compete with each other. And because of this, it creates a danger when there is more than 1 or 2 states that are in control of the world. So right now, we can see prevailing powers like the United States, like Russia, like China, all competing with each other. But this is what we call a multipolar framework, where there is more than 2 powers who are in the central axis and trying to dominate each other. And this creates something inherently unstable, which is why Mearsheimer criticizes a lot of the Cold War policies that led to China gaining so much power. And in fact, China is one of the biggest threats that Mearsheimer claims exist to the United States. But instead of acting with military force or trying to project power onto China, Mearsheimer argues that in fact we should allocate our budget and our military resources domestically and work on our national liberal values. And this is quite different from what Hal Brands thinks. Hal Brands is a research fellow, and he publishes a lot more articles than Mearsheimer does, but a lot less in-depth theory-based books. But Hal Brands has a little bit of a more popular foreign strategy with the current US government, which is his version of grand strategy. And what that entails is basically exerting military force, intervention, and using that show of liberal hegemony to protect US interests, but also making sure that national security is protected through going abroad and intervening in these sites, like maybe third world countries, like areas in the South China Sea which are threatening US interests, like protecting Taiwan and Ukraine and possibly Israel. And because of this, Hal Brands has a very different view on the impacts of liberal hegemony. A lot of Mearsheimer's offense about the harms that liberal hegemony brings to the United States revolves around the term endless intervention, which is that once the United States keeps trying to get involved in these foreign conflicts, it will never stop. Where do we draw the line? At some point, it's an overextension of our military budget, of our time allocation, and in fact, it drains the United States. Hal Brands, however, argues that even if all of these things are true, that is not a reason to not intervene. In fact, there is benefits that outweigh those harms that we should focus on. Once we pursue liberal agenda outside of the United States, it will take a preemptive role in preventing future conflict, future genocide, future humanitarian violations. And not only that, but it'll help maintain the United States as the strongest power. And that will be the biggest impact and actually help the United States the greatest in maintaining their security interests and future agenda for them. And even if things like regional primacy would be bad, it does not have to be a long-term permanent state. The United States should do everything in its power right now to push back competing powers like China and Russia in order to cement itself at the top. It does not have to keep continually doing this. Instead, it should be used as a stepping board for future US interests that involve long-term protection of economic, health, and military sectors. And because the threat of Chinese and Russian imperialism is so great to both authors, there is a consensus that something needs to change, that there needs to be reform. However, Mearsheimer's vision involves a retreat from foreign policy and involves more allocating resources at home. However, Hal Brands wants to expand and extend the military in both a show of force and also with aid and possibly diplomacy to secure interests. And so this is where we can kind of see Brands and Mearsheimer differ. I will put Mearsheimer right here in the green as a libertarian leftist because he has announced that he will vote for Bernie Sanders if he runs again, and that is why he is down there in the little green corner. And Hal Brands belongs up at the authoritarian right because even though he is doing these things in what he claims are humanitarian rights and preventing things like climate change, he is in fact arguing for an extension of the US government and in a way that is traditionally conservative. So